Welcome to Ripple Effect Connection. I'm your host, Christy Hugic. What do you do when the life you've carefully built around health and wellness gets shaken by unexpected challenges, both your own and those of someone you love? Today, I'm joined by Suzanne Geraci, a former health content creator and passionate advocate for all things wellness. Suzanne has long been a trusted resource for family and friends seeking guidance on their health journeys, and I've had the privilege of coaching alongside her, so I can tell you firsthand how deeply she cares and how much wisdom she brings to the table. This episode is more than just a conversation. It's a real, honest exchange between two friends. Suzanne opens up about navigating personal health challenges and a life-altering family event that forced her to reevaluate everything she thought she knew about resilience, nervous system healing, and the emotional ties we all have to food and comfort. We're sharing this with you because we know these kinds of conversations matter. I hope you enjoy this episode. Suzanne, this is so exciting. Welcome to the podcast. This is your first appearance on Ripple Effect Connection.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Christy, for having me. I enjoy listening to your podcast, watching your podcast, and I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, and I will take any excuse to talk to Suzanne. So don't be surprised if you don't get other invites if I don't see you for a while, because this is a good way to catch up. And I always tell people we're really just letting them in on a lot of conversations that we all have together. So I think that's kind of what you and I are going to do today. I mean, you and I have coached groups in the past. We've been in the health space for quite a while together. We think the same about a lot of things. So the first thing I'm still going to ask you, though, is the same I ask every guest who comes in, and that is, what is your why? Why did you get involved in into health in general and living just a healthier lifestyle?
Sure, I'm happy to share that with you. I guess the short answer is, Christy, that I'm looking for longevity and resilience in my life for myself and for my family. The longer story is that I watched my dad at a very early age succumb to cancer. He was 53, so actually he was the same age as I am right now. He passed away from cancer. And after that, I watched other family members be diagnosed with and ultimately pass away from other diseases, including cancer as well. So I knew that I needed to do better for myself and for my family in particular. And at that point in my life, I just wasn't doing life well. I wasn't making good, healthy decisions. And that was really the impetus for me moving forward with this health journey that I started about 13 years ago, and once I made up my mind to do it, I got up the next morning, I started walking. That was the first exercise that I ever did. I started researching what I should eat because I really didn't have any idea. And then it's just been a journey ever since. And again, that's been about 13 years ago.
And I know we're going to get into some particulars in this, but when you were, I'm going to, have you put the other lens in, and that's the lens in looking out and seeing what you saw when we were coaching. We were coaching an elimination protocol together. We were coaching groups. What did you see when you were coaching these groups? What did you see in the people that came to us?
So, I think that I saw anyway, people who wanted that same thing. They wanted to be resilient. They wanted energy. We saw people who wanted to lose weight. Of course, I feel like that is part of one's overall health goals. We saw people who didn't know how to eat. Well, didn't know how to eat for health. And so that was really exciting for me anyway, to help them learn how to do that. And I am really proud of the work that I did with the people that I worked with. It was just a wonderful experience for me.
I mean, it was super rewarding. We had some great success stories and some wonderful people who would come back. I felt like even if they didn't really need us, they just wanted to come back. And I think that connection is also really, really important in our journeys. And I think that having somebody alongside for the ride is a big deal. Do you feel like that was, one of the most impactful things we did? I mean, I felt like we could not say much and they were just happy to be there sometimes. Did you feel like that?
I did. Not to toot our own horns, but I think that we did a great job. People felt comfortable with us. We were a group of women that were speaking honestly and openly about our own journeys, about our own struggles. And I think that made us human and really approachable. to these people that came to us. And I think that was really important. I had conversations on the side with them. I know you did too. Obviously, they would connect with one or more of us, and it was great to chat with them. Again, I'm really proud of that work that we did.
Yeah, it was great. And then I think that they came to us always with a story. There was always like something that triggered to them, I need to do something. So there's always kind of that aha moment where for a while you think this doesn't really apply to me. And I'm sure there's people out there that listen or see an email that comes up with whether it's I'll put my own in my own shoes since I should only speak about myself anyway. But if I send a newsletter and someone sees something in there and they think that doesn't apply to me, it doesn't apply to me because it hasn't affected them quite yet. So there's always a story where something triggers them. But you had that moment too. You had those things happen 13 years ago and within your health journey. So can you talk us through some of the signals and things that happened in your journey?
Sure. Well, we've learned that much of our health is due to our lifestyle choices. And so, just going back to my dad, being diagnosed with cancer at such an early age and then passing from that. Um, I could look back now, and I even knew then that that illness that he had was most probably due or brought on or exacerbated by his lifestyle choices. So I knew that there were lifestyle choices that I needed to fix for myself going forward if I wanted to be as healthy as I could be. And that's what I wanted. So, I looked at how much I was consuming wine and why I was consuming wine. That was a big piece of things. What kind of a role did sugar play in my life? And what I found was that I was using those things for comfort. When I had a hard day, I was looking for that glass of wine, which then would lead to 2 glasses of wine. And so doing that every night, for me anyway, was not healthy. It interfered with my sleep, which then made me want to eat more and made me crave sugar. So, yes, I was recognizing all of those things in my life. Another thing that happened that was really impactful and kind of was the kick in the butt that I needed to get started on this journey was I had literally just started walking and decided that I wanted to take it up a notch. So I started a walk to run program and ended up with a really good sized stress fracture in my right tibia, which is the bone that goes from your knee to your foot. And, when they diagnosed me, the doctor was kind of scratching his head and he was like, I don't get why you would have broken that bone. So he sent me on for a DEXA scan. And at the time I was 40. And the DEXA scan came back with significant bone loss. It was actually osteoporosis at that time. So that's early onset, really, really early onset. And 13 years ago, I remember speaking to the osteo doctor that I saw that was treating me for the stress fracture. He's like, Suzanne, I don't know where to send you. Like, I don't know what doctor to send you to treat you for this osteoporosis. And I remember having the conversation with him and saying, well, you're a bone doctor. Wouldn't you treat it? And he said, well, that makes sense. But actually, no, I don't treat it. So I would follow up with your GP. And he did mention that there was a shot that I could take like twice a year that would build bone. So he was talking about a pharmaceutical. And I ended up taking that shot for 3 years. It's called Prolia, and had some pretty severe side effects from it and ended up getting off of it about 3 years ago. But yeah, that was, the bone loss I needed to address. And I ended up going, after I got off the pharma drug, the Prolia, I ended up going to a functional medicine doctor. And of course, he did, as you know, Christy, they do the whole gamut of testing. There's in office testing that they do, there's extensive blood work tests that I had never even heard of. And he actually came back, and my results came back that I had a toxic overload in my system of heavy metals in particular. And he felt like that was the reason why my bones weren't good. So I went through a whole protocol with him: nutrition protocol, detox, as extreme detox protocol. I mean, I had to cut everything. I had to cut electronics out of my life for 7 days. That was probably the hardest piece of the protocol. So no telephone other than making calls to people, no social media, no television. I read a lot of books and I made it through, but that was to manage stress. His thought that His thought is that if we could get my body back into a state of homeostasis, that all of my system functions would come into balance, and that would ultimately help my bones regenerate in the way that they should. So yeah.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, so people understand that when there are toxins at play, they will prevent the absorption of nutrients. And so, calcium, that's going to get blocked. We'll see people that have iron, but the body's not able to utilize it. Like, there's blocks. So basically, we're looking at it like a puzzle, and there's blocks. And unfortunately, it gets really complicated. So doctors, a lot of times, right, they're specialists and they only look at one thing, but really what's being affected is way more than just one thing. And so it becomes like multifactorial, and it can get very complicated for the person going through it. But at the end of the day, you have to just keep in mind that we need to replenish nutrients and remove toxicities at the end of the day, because it literally affects every system in your body. It's going to affect your hormones. It's going to affect, like you, for your bones. When your nutrients are affected, there are what are called cofactors that are needed to make conversions in your body, like in the hormones and things like that. So when those things are lacking, it's going to hurt everything. So what did you have to do dietarily? Because I always found that interesting, what you had to do. Because look, I don't throw shade on one way of eating over another. I have seen the success stories on multiple sides of this coin. In my practice and in my time that I have seen, I have had to dig some people who were on a plant-based diet out of a hole. So tell me dietarily, I want you to talk through kind of what happened with that and what they suggested you do and kind of where you landed also.
Sure. Well, the doctor that I saw was very passionate about the plant-based diet. Now, when I say plant-based, let me be clear what I mean. That's whole food plant-based. So there was none of the plant-based processed meat that you see on the market. There were no processed foods in the diet whatsoever. It was strictly whole food plant-based. So what that meant for protein sources, for me anyway, beans and legumes. I could do soy, whole food sources of soy, but of course they wanted that to be organic everything, quite honestly. And they wanted me to consume at least 9 servings of fruits and vegetables per day, which is a lot, even for me. And I love fruits and vegetables. So that was a real challenge. I want to say that I recall that there was the first week I had to do heavy duty green juice detox.
Yep.
And then I think I was allowed like one plant-based meal per day, in addition to my green smoothies or my green juices. And I felt amazing, like during that time that I was doing it. I did get a little hungry, but it wasn't too bad for that first week. And then I transitioned out of that. I finished that and I went into like the 3 plant-based meals per day. So it was a lot of cooking. It was a lot of meal prep. I was totally used to that. I was 100% fine with it. What I found while I was probably after the 6th week of eating whole foods plant-based, what I found is that I was hungry. And I can only attribute that to the fact that I wasn't getting enough protein, perhaps. I wasn't, again, consuming any like processed foods. So like I wasn't doing breads, even though they might have been plant-based, that kind of thing. It was just fruits and vegetables and beans and legumes. That's all I was eating. So when I went back for my checkup appointment with the doctor, I asked him, I said, would it be okay for me to incorporate animal-based protein at least a few times a week? And he was very receptive to that. He was like, absolutely, Suzanne, whatever works for you. Because he knew that I was active.
Mm-hmm.
And it made sense that I was getting hungry. At that point, I had gone back to my regular workout routine, which at the time was a lot of cardio. And he said, you can still get a ton of benefits being mostly plant-based and having a few meals where you incorporate animal protein. So, that's where I've kind of landed. That's where I am today. I probably do eat more animal protein today than I did then. And we're about 3 years out from that. But I would say that even today, my diet is plant forward, whole foods plant forward.
And I think it's important that you did it the right way, in that, the dangers of the vegan tends to be too that they're not only lacking in protein, but they're very carb focused, very grain focused. And that's where trouble starts too, because that can be difficult. And also, too, for some people, a change in the short term or eating another way in the short term is not necessarily the way to eat long term. And so you landed on your bio individuality and what works for you, which is what we want for everybody. So, I had great success on keto, but keto's when I was healing from MS, but keto's not the way to live the rest of my life. You can't stay there, in my opinion. So I love that you did that, because that is what the process is about. That is what you taught so many people, was to listen to your body and to come up with really what's for you. But I think too that something else people are going to wonder, where did the heavy metals come from? What did you deal with that? Because, when you are detoxing, people, again, I talked about this when we did our detox cleanse, in January. Detox is a scary word for people, okay? They're scared of the detoxification, but what's in you and it's more scary to me to have it in than to have it out. Yes, no,
Agree.
it can be
Yeah.
a tough process, but can you explain the process you went through? Because that's kind of a nightmare what you had to go through too. So I'm not going to ever tell anybody it's a straight line, easy journey either, but I think you're an example too of like, yeah, I went through this. It wasn't fun. But you came out the other side. So if you don't mind sharing that, I think people would get a lot from that story.
So the detox protocol that he created for me was specific to the heavy metal overload that I had in my system. And of course, he was really concerned. He's like, this is a significant load that I'm seeing. Do you have any idea where this may have come from? And I said, I don't know. I didn't know anything about heavy metals at the time. I wasn't feeling bad. Like I didn't feel sick. So I was kind of surprised when the blood work showed that I had that toxicity level. And I don't recall what the number was, but it was high enough to make him very concerned. And he started going down the list of things like, do you work around metals? No. And then he went down the list some more and he got to, what about amalgam fillings? And I went, oh, yeah, I just had all of my amalgam fillings removed like 6 months ago. And he goes, okay. And he said, who took them out for you? And I said, well, I was seeing this cosmetic dentist and he was looking at them one day in my mouth and he's like, yeah, you probably should get those out. We don't do those anymore. And I said to the dentist, I'm like, well, I'm not having any problems with them. It's not, you don't see cracks or damage or anything, do you? I mean, they're really old. I had them since I was in my teens. And he said, no, he says, they're fine. He says, but they contain heavy metals. So we need to get them out of your mouth. And I said, okay. And so I made the appointment and I went back to his office on my appointment day to have my fillings removed. And he removed all 6 of my amalgam fillings that day. And I didn't think anything of it because I didn't know any better. But as I was talking to this functional medicine doctor and telling him the story, his eyes got really big. And he said he took them out all in one day. And I said, yeah. And he asked me, he said, did he do chelation? And I said, what's chelation? And he said, so when he pulled all of the amalgam fillings out, Suzanne, and he didn't use chelation, he basically released all of the heavy metals into your bloodstream. And he said, was he a functional medicine dentist? And I said, no, he was not. He's a cosmetic dentist in my area. He told me that I needed to have this done, so I did it. So that's where my heavy metal toxic load came from. And he put me on the protocol, the nutrition protocol. I had other detox electronic protocols, but I had to take binders, right, to get rid
Yep.
of the heavy metals.
Yep.
I was on a slew of supplements, and I just had to be religious about taking them. I had to drink a lot of water. A lot
A
of water,
lot.
probably more water than I've ever had. He told me that the green juice detox would also help with the flushing as well.
Yeah.
So I did what he told me to do. I went back at my checkup appointment in 6 weeks and he reran my blood work and my toxic load had come down significantly. So That was great. I was glad to know that that was out of my body.
It's a good doctor because you have to heavy metals, you can't do it fast. It can be significantly bad if you do it fast. So anytime someone's going through chelation, it's not easy, but you got to have somebody who knows. And if anyone is sitting there listening to this and thinking, "Oh my God, I have X amount of fillings in there," it doesn't mean you necessarily have to get them all out. You can get them checked. And then what we would recommend is a biological dentist. And they have a system now too, I believe. If you see a certain biological dentist, they can take more out in one day, but they have equipment that's used so that the metal doesn't leak, like for lack of a better way to say it. So that it is really important to get that checked and get it checked by the proper people. And I'm sorry that you had that happen, but I'm glad you're on the other side of it. And of course, taking binders and taking, drops and that protocol, I'm all too familiar with all that stuff, but they're intense. They can be intense. When we're designing them for people, we have to think about compliance, and is the person going to be able to handle what we're giving them, or do we have to give it in a different way, in a different form? There's more than one way to skin a cat. So it's not, there are busy moms or working moms that feel like it's impossible to take drops 3 times a day or do binders. Set your schedule and your medications and your supplements away from a binder because the timing of that matters. But there are also certain binders that are good for heavy metals or not. So we are always trying to design a protocol with in mind, how it works for that person. So I'm just glad you found the right person and got that taken care of, because it causes significant issues. Heavy metals are no joke. I can tell you from running all the hair tissue mineral analysis tests that I've run a lot of them in the last month. I have never seen anyone's come back without high aluminum. Every single person's aluminum are out of range, and a good handful of people with mercury. And people are like, where am I getting this from? It's everywhere. And that's the thing. It's really everywhere. So that's why when we're kind of preaching that you have to nip and tuck things when you can, it's really, really important. So those metals do cause some issues. But now I want to move on to the role that you had to play as the caregiver, because that's a difficult role. And I think, you and your husband, Dave, are near and dear to my heart. And when this whole thing happened that we're about to talk about, my heart sank because I just knew it's just so hard on every person involved in this. So, if you want to share what the circumstances were a year ago with your husband, Dave, I think there are going to be people who resonate with this story.
Yeah, sure. Christy, I'm happy to share with that. Well, my husband Dave had a massive heart attack about a year ago. It was unexpected on every level. We're healthy people. We work hard to stay healthy. So that means exercise, diet, and we've been that way for a really long time. He is I like to call him a recreational athlete because he's been a cyclist now, former marathon runner, but his knees haven't been good, getting older. So he moved to the bike. He cycles a lot of miles. He puts in a lot of miles on the weekend, and during the warmer months, he's always on the road riding that bike. So it was a shock to hear on a Monday morning a year ago, that he was fighting for his life. And I was faced with the possibility of losing him. That was very difficult in that moment, and even today to think about. I feel like a year out, he's doing great. He's healthy. He's got great reviews from his doctors. I think the hardest part of all of this has just been dealing with the emotional trauma that comes with it. My nervous system and to this day, still gets dysregulated when I think about it. But I lived in a state of fight or flight there for a good 6 or 8 months. And I feel like, we're just finding our footing at this point. But I fell back. I will be honest with you, Christy. When you're just in those weeks and months after something significant like this happens, you find yourself like falling back into really old habits from like 13 years ago, where I was looking for wine, where I was looking for sugar. The difference was this go around was that I recognized that immediately. And I went, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like that hasn't been a part of my life for a really long time. Something is up. And that's when I got some therapy and worked with a woman who introduced me to, it's called EMDR. And I don't remember what that stands for, but it has to do with rapid eye movement and a light bar. and it basically moves some trapped trauma around in your brain and makes room for you to do life well. But yeah, I had to figure out how to fix myself so I could help him. Because there were days when just the thought of his heart attack would throw me into a panic attack. Yeah, and he survived. I mean, that's the thing. So um there's guilt associated with that too. Like, I had guilt about, why can't I just move past what didn't happen? Why can't I just be grateful for the fact that he's here? I think it was just so sudden, that
Yeah.
day, that morning that it happened. It was really, I had no time to process it. I had to start moving. And it's interesting because when I first met with my therapist, she said, Suzanne, you remind me of somebody who's just been in a car accident, right? You see these videos of people who wreck their cars, and the car is like, the wheels are still spinning, and you see the person in the car open the door and get out and start stumbling and walking like they're driven to
Yeah.
get out and just keep going. That was me. That's your
Yeah.
nervous system like pushing you forward. You don't know
Mm-hmm.
where you're going or how you're going to get there, and I felt like that was me for a really long time. But things
Yeah.
are better. Things are better, and we're doing great.
And EMDR is a great therapy, and I think that when things like this do happen, there's again more than one way to skin a cat. So, different therapies hold their place for people at different times. I have a podcast coming up eventually. When I decide to do it, I want to wait a little bit because I want to be able to share the entire process. I haven't done EMDR, and EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, I think, if I remember what those stand for. It's a tough one. It's a tough one to remember, but I
That's why
think
I
I
don't
remember.
remember it.
Yeah, so that's why we call it EMDR. But
Right.
that is what it is. And it's helping you get rid of those negative emotions and kind of replacing them with positive ones. And it can be exhausting. It's a hard therapy, no doubt. But you sometimes, you have to do the work. You have to be uncomfortable sometimes to get back to comfortable. And that is the hard part of all this. There's always uncomfortable moments. It is also people like yourself and just so many people in general being in fight or flight all the time. It's really become a focus for me, a passion point for me to help people with that. Because I do think I don't see people heal from physical things without this component. And so I always say to myself, well, if I can get someone to wrap their head around this, I feel like a lot of things are going to fall into place. That homeostasis you were kind of talking about in the body, just getting the body to know it's safe. It all comes from fear and uncertainty. That's what all that derives from. And if people haven't listened to the podcast with Dr. Dave Rabin, I'm putting a plug in for that because I think he speaks about all this stuff wonderfully and how trauma affects people. So I think you sharing that, what were some of the signs for you that you knew you were stuck? Like the
Well,
signs for you, the nervous system was so dysregulated. Like I know you talked about turning to some things that you hadn't done in a while, but what were like sleep, like how it affects? Because I think sometimes people don't, the awareness is so much a part of it. That's step one. Nothing happens without the awareness.
yeah. So what I noticed specifically in the weeks and the months following Dave's heart attack, we went back to work, and I was back in the office full time. And what I noticed there, very unusual and unlike me, is that I could not focus. Like, I literally would open an email and start to type out my email, and then I would look down at my watch, and 30 minutes would have passed, and I would have typed nothing on the screen. So, like, it's like I was gone. Like, I just kind of escaped for a little bit. That was one thing. Lack of focus, my attention span was off. I also had some real some real issues with hearing or seeing an ambulance. There was a couple of times when I had to pull my car off the side of the road because I would have a panic attack. Obviously, Dave traveled to the hospital in an ambulance. I was not with him when that happened, but I do recall being on the way to the hospital to meet the ambulance there, and we had to travel through school zones. It was first thing in the morning, so people were on the road, and I could not get there fast enough. Like, I just felt like I was not going to make it to the hospital before he left this world. And that was devastating for me to think of. So there was that. There were panic attacks, lack of attention. I was sleeping okay. Thank God for that. I think just a general like dissatisfaction with everything in my life. And I felt extremely guilty about that. Like, here was my husband. He just had survived a heart attack. We adore each other, right? We're high school sweethearts. I should be grateful. And yet I can't find pleasure in anything, not even the cup of coffee that I used to enjoy. Do you know
That's,
what I mean?
it's because that fear
Yes. Yeah.
overtook, right?
Yeah.
That emotion just overtakes you. And that fear, that uncertainty, those moments of like, is he going to live? Is he not going to live? Like the most fight or flight, your body thinks it's being chased by a tiger right
Exactly.
then and there, right? It's
Exactly.
such an overwhelming feeling, and this can happen to people from, this is, whether you want to label it big T trauma or little T trauma really doesn't matter, because it's all about how your body holds on to it and how your body is keeping it. It could be something that seems so trivial and little, which I will talk about when I talk about my story and the things that come up when I work with the osteopath, and I'm like, why is that a big deal? But I obviously, it was a big deal because I didn't remember it, but then I did. When he works on my fascia, I remember things from my childhood that I was like, did that really happen? I had to go to my dad and be like, did this really happen, Dad? And he'd be like, yeah. And I'm somehow, my body was holding that.
Right.
So that's why too, it's, people will say, I'm not stressed, I'm not this, but how are you holding on to it? And you were holding on to that, and you were overwhelmed by that fear and all that. Is there anything else you had to do to become unstuck? Was there any modalities that you used at home? Any nervous system regulation that you did it at home on your own, or was it mostly just with the therapist?
I had a great therapist, and
You did.
she recommended, when I'd finish my session with her, the EMDR. And to your point earlier, Christy, it is exhausting to do the EMDR because you literally are rewiring your brain. So I would get done with my session and like just want to eat and sleep. That's all I wanted to do for the rest of the day. So I had to make sure that I was at home when I did that. And we did it virtually, which I thought was really cool. But she gave me, I could downloaded a playlist of EMDR TikTok.
Yeah.
It's like a clock, tick
Yeah.
tock, tick tock, and it's bilateral music.
Mm.
So she gave me that. And there were times when I would just, like, I know this sounds terrible, but I would plug it into the car. I would plug it in when I was driving to work.
Yeah.
Just to kind of reframe things. I probably shouldn't be doing that, but there was no music. It was just a tick tock tick. It was just a clock, basically. But it would allow me to sometimes bring my focus back instead of kind of feeling like I was, well, for lack of a better word, dissociating.
Mm-hmm.
There were moments after Dave's heart attack that, like, I would literally feel like I left my body. Like I talked about writing the email and
Yeah.
then looking at my watch and seeing 30 minutes had elapsed and not seeing anything on the screen. So that's dissociation, and that's nervous system dysregulation, fight or flight, inaction, trauma.
In action. 100%.
So
I think that it's great that you did the work, and that is, again, part of the battle. And someone's going to listen to this and say, that's me. Because, we're at that age too where we have to deal with our parents later in life. Where loss becomes part of the story. As you get older, you go through that circle of life and that kind of, space. And I know a lot of people, I've had a lot of patients at the clinic who have had a parent pass away during care, and it sends them into a tailspin. It really, really does. And I understand it. And you have to address it. You have to, unfortunately, it's not comfortable, but you have to move through it, or else you will hold on to that and it will affect you. And then it manifests into sickness, and it manifests and it becomes a snowball, and it just keeps rolling.
Right.
So I'm just glad you recognized it and you were able to get the help that you needed.
yeah, and then I just circle back to my why that we talked about at the top of this, Christy, and that is that I just want resilience. I want longevity. I
Mm-hmm.
want to be here for my family, and I want to feel good. I got a life to live, and I got to keep moving on.
Yeah, and the goal is, I think for all of us, I don't want to be I don't like the term anti-aging, because it's a fact of life, like we're going to age, but it is the whole theory and the whole reason why we all do what we do, and we try to do things in the healthiest manner we can so we can achieve that longevity, is to live longer and die shorter. Like we don't want to be sick, not able to move. Like that's not in the cards. That's what we're all fighting for, I think. And what we hope that more people can do here, if they start to, maybe with a little education and some slow, simple changes, can get closer to that. I think that that's my goal. I know that we didn't get to coffee, but you know what? I want to end it where we are because I think this was a powerful conversation, and not that coffee's not, but then I have an excuse to bring you back. So
That's great. We'll talk about
if
coffee
someone,
next time.
we will, if someone wants to connect with you, let's just say someone hears this and maybe they want to talk to you more about what you went through. If there's any way you want to, maybe people that are able to connect with you either through social media or whatever, let us know here.
Sure. Well, I'm not on social media much anymore, although I used to be. But if people would love to reach out to me and talk to me about anything, I'm happy to chat. You can find me on Instagram at WP_wellness, WELLNESS. That's my Instagram handle. Or you can find me on Facebook. I'm still on Facebook occasionally at Suzanne Nally, Nally, Geraci, Geraci.
Well, I can't wait for you to come back. So thank you for coming, and I appreciate your openness and sharing this with others because I think it's going to help some people.
Thanks for having me on, Christy. It was fun.
If you enjoyed today's episode, feel free to connect with any of us on social media and let us know what resonated with you. Full show notes can be found at christyhugic.com/podcast. Please take a second to like, follow, review, and share this podcast with anyone who might benefit. And if you can leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts, it really helps me bring more amazing guests your way. Stay tuned for the next episode of Ripple Effect Connection. Let's create waves of change together.